The doorbell's chime cut through Vanessa Monroe's morning meditation playlist like a blade through silk. She paused her Instagram story recording, smoothing down her perfectly styled waves before checking the Ring camera. A man in a worn flannel shirt stood on her porch, toolbox in hand, shoulders dusted with snow. "Great," she muttered, applying another coat of lip gloss. The electrician, the cabin's main power, had flickered out during last night's storm, leaving her with only the backup generator. Her followers were expecting her weekly, cozy winter vibes content, and she couldn't afford any technical difficulties. Not when her engagement rates were already slipping. She opened the door with her practiced smile, the one that had landed her 3 brand partnerships this month alone. The man before her looked nothing like the polished contractors she usually hired in the city. His dark skin was weathered from outdoor work, his hands calloused, and his boots carried traces of mud despite the mat. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Jamal Carter. Got your call about the electrical issue." His voice was steady, professional, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. Not the usual deference she expected from service workers, but a quiet confidence that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. "Yes, of course. Please, come in." She stepped aside, noting how he wiped his boots twice before entering. "I hope you can fix this quickly. I've content to film today." Jamal nodded, taking in the cabin's interior with an electrician's eye. Exposed beams, modern fixtures, everything designed to look rustic while maintaining luxury. "I'll need to check the main panel first. Storm probably tripped something." As he worked, Vanessa found herself watching him from the kitchen island, where she'd set up her ring light. The way his hands moved with practiced efficiency, how he examined each wire with careful attention. She'd expected someone rough around the edges, maybe unprofessional, but Jamal worked with a kind of precision that spoke of years of experience. "So," she said, attempting conversation while adjusting her camera angle, "how long have you been doing this?" 15 years. Started as an apprentice right out of high school. He didn't look up from the panel. "Built my own business about 5 years ago." "That's nice." The response came automatically, the same tone she used with her housekeeper or delivery drivers. Polite, but distant. "I don't suppose you follow social media much." "Not really. Too busy with real work." Something in his tone made her bristle. Real work, as if what she did wasn't real, wasn't valuable. She'd built a following of 2 million people, created a brand worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But looking at Jamal's steady focus, his genuine skill, she felt a strange pang of something she couldn't quite name. "Found the problem," he said, flipping a switch. The lights flickered back to life, and her laptop chimed with notification sounds. Surge protector couldn't handle the storm's power fluctuations. "You might want to upgrade your whole system if you're planning to stay here long." "How much would that cost?" "Depends on what you need. But for a place like this, probably around $3,000. $3,000. She'd spent that on a single handbag last month, but something about the way he said it made her aware of the number differently, like it represented weeks of his work, not just a casual purchase. "I'll think about it," she said, already calculating how it would affect her budget. "What do I owe you for today?" $200 for the service call and parts. She handed him her credit card, and their fingers brushed during the exchange. His hands were warm, steady, and she found herself noticing the contrast between his dark skin and her pale fingers. The observation surprised her with its intensity. "Thank you, Jamal. You've been very professional." He packed his tools with the same methodical care he'd shown with the electrical work. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Call if you need anything else." After he left, Vanessa stood at her window, watching his truck disappear down the mountain road. She tried to return to her content creation, but something felt off. The perfectly arranged pillows, the artfully placed candles, the ring light casting its artificial glow over everything. It all seemed somehow less real than the quiet competence she'd just witnessed. She picked up her phone to check his business card. Carter Electric Solutions. Simple, straightforward, honest. Unlike her own brand, which was built on selling an impossibly perfect version of life that existed only in carefully curated moments. That evening, as she edited her day's footage, she found herself thinking about Jamal's words. Real work. The phrase echoed in her mind as she applied filters to hide the slight imperfections in her skin, as she cropped out the mess beyond the camera's frame, as she crafted captions about authenticity while living anything but. She deleted 3 different versions of her post before settling on something generic about gratitude and cozy winter nights. Her followers would eat it up. She knew. They always did. But for the first time in months, she wondered what they would think if they saw the real her. The one who felt more genuine in those few minutes talking to an electrician than she had. In any of her recent content, the thought unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Hey, stop racism, extra fam. So happy you're here today. Before we get all dramatic with the story, let's take a quick roll call. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments below. And hey, be honest. What did you think of the story so far? We read every single comment, yes, even the long ones, and your words truly keep us going. Let's try something fun. Can we hit 50 comments on this video? We think you can do it. Your support isn't just appreciated, it's the heartbeat of what we do. So don't forget to show some love, comment, share, and let's keep the good vibes rolling together. You're awesome. The second storm hit 3 days later with a vengeance that made the previous one look like a gentle dusting. Vanessa watched from her cabin window as the snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, transforming the mountain landscape into a white void. By evening, her driveway had disappeared under 3 feet of fresh powder. Her phone buzzed with weather alerts, road closures, power outages across the county. She checked her backup generator, grateful for Jamal's earlier work on the electrical system. At least she had heat and lights, though the internet signal was spotty at best. The knock on her door came just as she was settling in with a cup of tea and her laptop. Through the peephole, she saw Jamal's familiar silhouette, this time bundled in a heavy coat and wool cap. "I was checking on my clients up here," he said when she opened the door, "making sure everyone's electrical systems are handling the storm okay." Snow clung to his shoulders and eyelashes, and she noticed how the cold had brought color to his cheeks. He looked more human somehow, less like the professional service provider, and more like someone who'd fought his way through a blizzard out of genuine concern. "That's very thoughtful of you. Everything seems to be working fine. Good roads are pretty bad though. Might be a few days before the plows can get up here." The implication hit her slowly. Days alone, with limited supplies and no way to leave. She'd been so focused on her content schedule that she hadn't considered being truly stranded. "I've got food and water," she said, more to convince herself than him. "I'll be fine." Jamal studied her face, and she felt exposed under his gaze. "When's the last time you were completely off the grid?" "I don't know. Years? Maybe? I always have service somewhere." "Well, tonight might be your first real break from all that." He gestured toward her phone. "Silver lining, right?" She wanted to laugh at his optimism, but something in his tone made her pause. There was no judgment there, just a simple observation about a situation she'd never considered as anything but problematic. "Would you like some coffee before you head back out there?" The offer surprised them both. She hadn't intended to extend it, but the words came out naturally. Jamal hesitated, glancing at his truck barely visible through the snow. "I appreciate it, but I should probably get moving. Few more clients to check on?" The roads looked terrible, and it's getting dark. They stood in her doorway, cold air swirling around them as snow continued to fall. She could see him weighing his options, practical concerns battling against what was clearly his instinct to remain professional boundaries. "Maybe just for a few minutes," he said finally, "till the worst of this passes." She led him to the kitchen, noting how he removed his boots without being asked and hung his coat carefully by the door. Small gestures that spoke of someone raised to be considerate of other people's spaces. "You take it black?" she asked, already knowing the answer somehow. "Please." They sat at her kitchen island, the same spot where she'd filmed dozens of morning routine videos. But now, with Jamal across from her, the space felt different, less like a set, more like an actual room where people might have real conversations. "So, what do you do when you're not fixing electrical problems?" "Read, mostly. Work on my truck. Spend time with my family." He sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim. "What about you? When you're not creating content, The question caught her off guard. Creating content had become so central to her identity that she couldn't remember what she'd done before it consumed her life. "I used to paint," she said, the words coming from somewhere deep and forgotten. "Watercolors mostly. Haven't touched a brush in years." "Why'd you stop?" "No time, no audience for it. Not practical." The reason sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Practical's overrated sometimes. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten. Not pity, exactly, but a kind of understanding that made her want to turn away. Says the man who makes his living solving practical problems. Different kind of practical. I fix things so people can live their lives. You stop living yours to show other people how to live theirs. The observation hit like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain how wrong he was, but no words came. Because somewhere in the brutal simplicity of his statement, she recognized a truth she'd been avoiding for months. Outside, the storm intensified, and she realized that Jamal wouldn't be leaving tonight. The thought should have made her nervous, but instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity about what might happen next. Chapter 3. The Test of Patience. Word count, 850. Narration, 340. Dialogue, 340. Description, 170. The power went out at midnight, plunging the cabin into darkness so complete it felt like being swallowed. Vanessa woke to the sudden silence, her white noise machine and air purifier cutting off mid-hum. She fumbled for her phone, its screen casting an eerie glow across the room. The backup generator should have kicked in automatically, but she heard nothing from the utility room. Fear crept up her spine as she realized how truly isolated she was. No heat, no lights, no way to contact the outside world. She found Jamal in the living room, already dressed and examining the generator by flashlight. He'd made a bed on the couch using throw pillows and the cashmere blanket she'd bought purely for photo props. "Generator's not responding," he said without looking up. "Fuel lines probably frozen. Common problem in weather like this. Can you fix it?" "Maybe, but not until morning. We'll need to keep warm tonight." The practical reality of their situation settled over her like the cold air seeping through the windows. She'd never been in actual danger before, never faced genuine discomfort that couldn't be solved with money or influence. The vulnerability was terrifying and oddly thrilling. What do we do? Build a fire, conserve body heat, wait it out. Jamal moved through the cabin with purpose, gathering wood from the decorative pile she'd never actually used. His movements were economical, efficient, shaped by experience with real emergencies rather than manufactured drama. She watched him build the fire, struck by how his hands worked with the same careful attention he'd shown with the electrical repair. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The flames caught and spread, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Come sit by the fire," he said, patting the rug beside him. "You'll freeze over there." She settled next to him, closer than she'd sat to anyone in months. Close enough to catch his scent, a mixture of soap and something uniquely him. The intimacy of sharing warmth felt more real than any of the carefully orchestrated moments she'd created for her audience. "I feel ridiculous," she admitted. "I've been living in this cabin for weeks, and I don't even know how to start a fire." "It's not ridiculous, just different priorities. You're being kind. Most people would call it spoiled. Most people don't know what it's like to live your life in public." The unexpected empathy in his voice made her look at him sharply. She'd expected judgment, maybe even mockery. Instead, she found genuine understanding. "You don't approve of what I do." It wasn't a question. "It's not my place to approve or disapprove, but I wonder sometimes if you approve of it." The question hung between them like smoke from the fire. She wanted to defend herself, to explain how hard she worked, how much her content meant to her followers. But sitting in the darkness, stripped of her usual props and lighting, the words felt hollow. "I used to love it," she said finally. "The creativity, the connection with people. But somewhere along the way, it became about numbers. Views, likes, engagement rates. I forgot why I started." "What made you start?" "I wanted to help people feel beautiful. Show them that they could create something special in their own lives." She laughed bitterly. Now I just show them things they can't afford and make them feel inadequate. So, change it. It's not that simple. This is my career, my income. I have contracts, obligations. Do you have a life? The question was asked gently, without accusation, but it cut deeper than any criticism. She thought about her day's wake up, check analytics, plan content, shoot content, edit content, respond to comments, research trends, sleep, repeat. I have a very successful brand, she said defensively. That's not what I asked. She stared into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood with mesmerizing intensity. When had she last sat quietly without documenting the moment? When had she experienced something purely for herself? You think I'm pathetic, she said. I think you're tired. Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Not pity, not judgment, but a kind of recognition that suggested he understood exhaustion in his own way. What about you? She asked. You have a life. I have work I'm proud of. It's family who loves me. A few close friends. Simple pleasures. He poked at the fire with a stick. Nothing that would photograph well. You'd be surprised. Authenticity is very popular right now. Is that what you call it? The gentle challenge in his voice made her think about the authenticity she performed daily, the carefully curated imperfections, the relatable struggles that were actually just minor inconveniences, the vulnerability that never went deeper than surface level. I don't know what's real anymore, she admitted. This is real, he said, gesturing to the fire, the storm outside, the two of them sharing warmth in the darkness. Everything else is just noise. She looked at him, this man who'd appeared in her life like a practical solution to a simple problem, but somehow become something more complicated, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. Morning brought a silence so profound it felt like the world had ended. Vanessa woke to find herself curled against Jamal's shoulder, the fire reduced to glowing embers. She jerked away, embarrassed by the intimacy of shared sleep, but he was already awake, staring thoughtfully at the frost-covered windows. How long have you been up? She asked, running her hands through her hair and immediately regretting it. She probably looked terrible, and for the first time in years, she had no way to fix it. Few hours. Been thinking about the generator problem. She watched him stretch, noting how he moved with the same careful economy she'd observed before. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. Even his morning routine was practical, purposeful. I must look awful, she said, catching her reflection in the dark television screen. You look human. The comment should have stung, but something in his tone made it feel like a compliment. When had looking human become something she'd forgotten how to do? I'll try to get the generator running, he said, pulling on his boots. But we should probably ration your phone battery. No telling how long this will last. Gosh, the thought of being completely disconnected from her online world sent a spike of panic through her chest. Her followers would notice her absence. Brand partnerships would suffer. Her carefully maintained momentum would stall. I have to post something. People will worry. Will they worry about you or about missing your content? The question hit like cold water. She opened her mouth to insist that her followers cared about her as a person, but the words stuck. How many of them even knew her real name? How many would notice if she disappeared tomorrow? That's not fair, she said finally. Maybe not, but it's worth thinking about. He headed outside, leaving her alone with the uncomfortable truth of his observation. She picked up her phone, staring at the screen full of notifications. Comments, likes, messages from other influencers asking about collaboration opportunities. A digital echo chamber of her own creation. When Jamal returned an hour later, his face was grim. Generators shot. Won't be able to get parts until the road's clear. How long? Could be days, week, maybe. The reality of true isolation settled over her. No power, no heat, except the fire. No connection to the outside world. She'd built her entire identity around being constantly available, constantly visible. Now she was trapped in silence with a man who seemed to prefer it that way. I'm scared, she admitted, the words coming out smaller than she intended. Of what? Of being nobody. Of just existing without anyone watching. Jamal sat beside her on the couch, and she caught that scent again. Something warm and real that made her want to lean closer. Maybe that's exactly what you need. Easy for you to say. You have a real life to go back to. What makes you think your life isn't real? She gestured around the cabin at the carefully arranged aesthetics. The ring lights and camera equipment scattered throughout. All of this, it's all performance. I don't know who I am when I'm not creating content. Then maybe it's time to find out. Something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. There was challenge there, but also kindness. Like he was offering her a gift, disguised as a dare. What if I don't like what I find? What if you do? They spent the afternoon talking in a way she hadn't talked to anyone in years. Not the surface-level conversations she had with other influencers. Not the transactional exchanges with business partners, but real conversation. About books, about family, about the person she'd been before likes and shares became the measure of her worth. I wanted to be an art teacher, she said, surprising herself with a confession. Before all this, thought I could help kids find their creativity. What happened? Social media happened. I started posting my lesson plans, then my classroom, then my life. Before I knew it, I was making more money from sponsors than teaching. So I quit. Do you miss it? I miss the kids. I miss feeling useful. She stared into the fire. I miss feeling like myself. What did yourself feel like? The question was asked so gently, it almost felt like a caress. She closed her eyes, trying to remember who she'd been before every moment became content. Messy, curious, real. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I used to paint in my pajamas and get watercolor on everything. I'd lose track of time, forget to eat. I felt alive. You could do that again. I don't even have supplies anymore. Sold everything when I moved to focus on content full-time. I've got some paper in my truck. And there's coffee for paint water. The suggestion was so practical, so simple, that it made her laugh. You want me to paint with coffee? Why not? Sometimes the best art comes from making do with what you have. She looked at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like a question she hadn't known she needed to ask. For the first time in months, she felt curious about what might happen next. The coffee painting was a disaster and a revelation. Vanessa's hands shook as she tried to recreate the mountain view outside her window. The brown liquid creating muddy streaks across the paper instead of the subtle gradations she remembered achieving with proper watercolors. But something about the imperfection, the impossibility of making it perfect, freed her in a way she hadn't expected. It's terrible, she said, laughing as she held up the soggy paper. It's honest, Jamal replied, feeding another log to the fire. When's the last time you made something just for yourself? She couldn't remember. Everything she'd created in the past 2 years had been for her audience, carefully constructed to generate engagement. The thought made her chest tight with something between grief and relief. I used to spend hours just experimenting, trying new techniques, mixing colors just to see what would happen. She set the failed painting aside. I forgot that art could be private. What else have you forgotten? The question lingered between them as they prepared their meager dinner. Jamal had produced a can of soup from his truck's emergency kit, and they heated it over the fire like camping. The simple act of sharing food felt more intimate than any of the carefully staged meals she'd posted. I used to love cooking, she said, stirring the soup with a wooden spoon. Real cooking, not just arranging pretty plates for photos. I'd experiment with flavors, make huge meals for friends. What happened to your friends? The question stung because she knew the answer. They got tired of every conversation being interrupted by photo opportunities. Every meal becoming a content session. I guess I did too, eventually. So you isolated yourself. I built a brand, she corrected. But the words felt hollow. Same thing, sometimes. She looked at him across the fire, his face half-shadowed in the flickering light. There was something about the way he listened. Fully present and unencumbered by the need to document or share the moment. It made her want to tell him things she'd never told anyone. I haven't had a real conversation in months, she admitted. Everything feels like performance now. Even when I'm alone, I catch myself thinking about how to turn my experiences into content. What are you thinking about now? How strange it is to just exist without recording it. She paused, considering how peaceful it is. Maybe that's what you've been missing. What? Peace. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. She'd been so focused on growth, on building, on more. that she'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be still. "I don't know how to be still anymore," she said. "You're being still right now." She looked around the firelit cabin, at the storm raging outside, at this man who'd somehow become her anchor in a world that suddenly felt too big and too fast. He was right. For the first time in years, she was simply existing in a moment without trying to capture it or share it. "Why aren't you afraid of silence?" she asked. "Because that's where you find yourself, in the quiet spaces between the noise. What if yourself isn't worth finding? Then you get to decide who you want to become." The simplicity of his statement hit her like a physical force. She'd been so busy maintaining her existing identity that she'd forgotten it was a choice, that she could choose differently. "I don't know how to be anyone else." You don't have to be anyone else. Just be yourself without the performance. "What if I don't know the difference anymore?" "Then you'll learn." His confidence in her ability to change, to grow, to become someone more authentic than the person she'd been performing made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Why do you care?" she asked. "What I do with my life, I mean." "Because I can see who you are underneath all the noise. And she's worth knowing." The words hit her like a gift she hadn't known she needed. When had anyone last seen her for who she was rather than what she could provide? When had anyone looked past her carefully constructed exterior to find the person she'd been hiding? "I don't know if I'm brave enough," she whispered. "Brave enough for what?" "To be real. To risk people not liking who I actually am. The people who matter will like you more for it." "How do you know?" "Because I do." The admission hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or leave unexplored. She looked at him, this man who'd entered her life to fix her electricity, but it somehow illuminated something much more essential. Something she'd been missing without even knowing it was gone. For the first time in years, she felt curious about who she might become if she stopped performing and started living. The storm broke on the third morning, leaving the world transformed. Vanessa woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, making the snow-covered landscape sparkle like something from a fairy tale. But instead of reaching for her phone to capture the moment, she simply lay still and watched the light dance across the ceiling. Jamal was already up, coffee brewing over the fire. He'd managed to keep them warm and fed for 3 days with nothing but practical skills and quiet competence. She watched him move around the cabin, noting how he'd become part of the space in a way that felt natural rather than intrusive. "Road crews will probably be here by afternoon," he said, handing her a mug. "You'll be able to get back to your regular life." The prospect should have filled her with relief, but instead, she felt something closer to dread. Her regular life meant returning to the endless cycle of content creation, the constant pressure to perform, the isolation disguised as connection. What if I don't want to go back? To what? To being Vanessa Monroe, lifestyle influencer. To pretending my life is perfect for strangers on the internet. Then don't. It's not that simple. Why not? She wanted to list all the reasons, all the obligations and contracts and expectations that bound her to her current path. But sitting in the firelit cabin, wrapped in a blanket with coffee-stained hands, those reasons felt flimsy. "Because I don't know who I am without it." He'd been finding out for 3 days. He was right. Stripped of her usual tools and audience, she'd rediscovered parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. The woman who could sit quietly without documenting the moment. Who could laugh at her own failed attempts at art. Who could have real conversations about things that mattered. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of starting over. Of disappointing people. Of not being enough without all the filters and editing. You're enough right now." The certainty in his voice made her look up from her coffee. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something gentle and intense that made her heart race. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen you, the real you, not the performance, not the brand, you. And you're remarkable." The word hit her like a physical force. When had anyone last called her remarkable for who she was, rather than what she'd achieved? When had anyone seen past the carefully constructed exterior to find something worth valuing? "I don't feel remarkable. I feel like a fraud." Everyone feels like a fraud sometimes. The difference is whether you let that stop you from being real. She set down her coffee and moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "What if I told you I've been thinking about you?" Not just during the storm, but before. Since the first day you came to fix my lights. Say I've been thinking about you too. Even though I was awful to you, dismissive and judgmental, you were scared. People do strange things when they're scared. I told myself you weren't my type. What's your type? She thought about her past relationships. The men who'd looked good in photos and understood her career, but never challenged her to grow. Safe, predictable. Someone who fit my image. And now I think my type is someone who sees me. Really, sees me. I see you. The words were simple, but they carried weight that made her chest tighten with possibility. She reached out and touched his hand, noting how their skin looked together, how his steadiness seemed to ground her restless energy. I don't know how to do this, she said. Do what? Be real with someone? Been performing for so long, I forgot how to just be myself. You're being yourself right now. This isn't myself. This is who I am when I'm scared and stripped of everything. Familiar. Maybe that's exactly who you are. She looked at him, this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. Someone who valued competence over appearance, authenticity over performance, presence over documentation. What happens when we leave here? She asked. Whatever we want to happen. I might not be the same person in the real world. Then we'll find out who you are in the real world. The possibility hung between them like a promise. She could go back to her old life, or she could risk everything for the chance to become someone more authentic. Someone who painted with coffee and sat by fires and had real conversations about things that mattered. I want to try, she said. Try what? Being real. With you, with myself, with my life. Then try. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative at first. Then, with growing certainty, it was nothing like the performed intimacy she'd become used to. Nothing calculated or documented. Just two people finding each other in the quiet space between who they'd been and who they might become. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, breathing in his scent and the promise of something new. I don't know what comes next, she whispered. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in years. The uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. The plow truck's rumble echoed through the valley like a promise of return to the ordinary world. Vanessa watched from her window as the massive machine carved through the snow, creating a path back to civilization. The sight should have filled her with relief, but instead, she felt a strange reluctance to rejoin the world she'd left behind. Jamal was outside, picking out his truck with methodical precision. She'd offered to help, but he'd insisted she stay. Warm inside, the consideration felt foreign after years of relationships where her comfort was never the priority. Her phone buzzed with life as the cell towers came back online. Notifications flooded the screen in an overwhelming cascade of missed calls, texts, and social media alerts. Her followers had noticed her absence. Brand partners were asking questions. The digital world she'd built was demanding her immediate attention. Vanessa? Oh my God, we thought you were dead. Her friend Sarah's voice crackled through the phone connection. You haven't posted in 3 days. People are freaking out. I'm fine. Just had some power issues during the storm. Thank God. I was about to call the police. You know how people get when influencers go dark without warning. Sarah's voice carried the peculiar mix of concern and excitement that came with potential drama. So, what's the story? Are you going to do a whole survival content series about it? The suggestion made Vanessa's stomach turn. The idea of transforming her past 3 days into content, of performing the vulnerability she'd actually experienced, felt like a betrayal of something sacred. I don't think so. Are you crazy? This is gold. Stranded in a snowstorm, finding myself in isolation. Your followers would eat it up. Through the window, she watched Jamal secure a tarp over something in his truck bed. His movements were careful, purposeful, utterly without performative elements. The contrast with her friend's enthusiasm for manufactured drama couldn't have been starker. I need to go. Sarah, I'll call you later. Wait, don't forget about the brand event tomorrow. That skincare launch you confirmed weeks ago. It's a brand event. She'd completely forgotten about her obligation to attend another carefully orchestrated gathering of influencers, each one performing their assigned role in the marketing machine. The thought of returning to that world, of slipping back into her performed persona, made her feel physically ill. "I'll be there," she said, the words tasting like ash. An hour later, Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring cabin appeared at her door, bundled in a pink parka and carrying a casserole dish. "Honey, I saw that man's truck in your driveway for days," she said, pushing past Vanessa into the cabin. "I hope you're being careful. You know how people talk, Mrs. Henderson. Jamal is an electrician. He was helping with storm damage." "Oh, I'm sure he was helping with something." The older woman's tone carried implications that made Vanessa's cheeks burn. "But appearances matter, dear, especially for someone in your position." "What position is that?" "A young woman with a reputation to maintain, a brand to protect." Mrs. Henderson set the casserole on the counter with unnecessary force. "I'm just saying, be smart about the company you keep." The casual racism in her neighbor's words hit Vanessa like a slap. She'd heard similar sentiments her entire life, usually couched in concern or practicality, but never directed at someone she cared about. The protective anger that rose in her chest surprised her with its intensity. "Jamal is a good man," she said carefully. "A skilled professional who went out of his way to help me." "I'm sure he is, dear, but you know how things look." After Mrs. Henderson left, Vanessa sat in her kitchen feeling contaminated by the interaction. She'd spent 3 days discovering something real and meaningful, only to have it reduced to gossip and judgment by someone who didn't know either of them. When Jamal knocked on her door an hour later, she felt a complex mix of joy and anxiety. Joy at seeing him, anxiety about how the outside world would perceive them together. "Road's clear," he said, stamping snow off his boots. "I wanted to check on you before I head back to town. My neighbor stopped by." Something in her tone made him pause. "Everything okay?" She made some comments about your truck being here, about appearances. Jamal's expression didn't change, but she saw something shift in his eyes. A familiar wariness that spoke of experiences with judgment she'd never had to face. "I see. Doesn't matter what she thinks," Vanessa said quickly. "I don't care about her opinions. Don't you?" The quiet question cut deeper than accusation would have. Because if she was honest, Mrs. Henderson's words had affected her. Not because she agreed with them, but because they reminded her of the world she'd have to navigate if she chose to pursue something real with Jamal. "I care about you," she said. But I'm scared of what people will say, what it might mean for my career." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "I hate that I'm scared, but I am. I understand. Do you?" "Because I feel like a coward." "You feel like someone who's built a life that depends on other people's approval." "That's not cowardice. It's just complicated." His understanding made her feel worse, not better. She wanted him to be angry, to give her a reason to retreat back into her safe, performed world. Instead, he was giving her the space to make her own choice. "What if I can't do this?" she asked. "What if I'm not brave enough to choose something real over something safe? Then you'll know something important about yourself. And if I am brave enough, then you'll know something even more important." She looked at him, this man who'd walked into her life like a question she hadn't known she needed to ask. Standing in her kitchen, he looked exactly like what he was, a working man who'd helped her through a difficult situation. But he also looked like possibility. Like the chance to become someone more authentic than the person she'd been performing. "Have to go to the city tomorrow," she said. "A work event, okay? Will you be here when I get back? Do you want me to be?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. She could ask him to wait, to give her time to figure out how to balance her old life with this new possibility. Or she could let him go and return to the safety of her carefully constructed world. "Yes," she said. "I want you to be here. Then I'll be here." The simple promise felt like an anchor in a world that suddenly seemed too fluid, too full of choices that mattered more than she'd expected. The drive to the city felt like traveling backward through time. With each mile, Vanessa felt herself slipping back into the persona she'd worked so hard to build. By the time she reached the skincare launch event, she was once again Vanessa Monroe, lifestyle influencer, complete with perfect makeup and carefully curated outfit. The hotel ballroom buzzed with the particular energy of orchestrated enthusiasm. Influencers moved through the space like performers on a stage, each interaction carefully calculated for maximum engagement. Ring lights illuminated impromptu photo shoots, and conversations were punctuated by the click of phone cameras. Vanessa, there you are. Marcus, the brand representative, swooped down on her with the manic energy of someone whose bonus depended on social media metrics. We were worried when you went dark. Everything okay? Just some weather issues. All resolved now. Perfect. We've got your talking points here. And the photo backdrop is set up in the corner. The other girls are already posting, so you'll want to get started. She accepted the branded gift bag and talking points, feeling like she was putting on a costume that no longer fit properly. Around her, other influencers performed their assigned roles with practiced ease, each one a slightly different version of the same manufactured authenticity. Vanessa, Riley, another lifestyle influencer, appeared at her elbow with phone in hand. Girl, you look amazing. This lighting is perfect for a quick story. Before she could protest, Riley was filming, chattering about the event, while Vanessa smiled and nodded on cue. The interaction felt surreal after days of genuine conversation with Jamal. So what's been going on? Riley asked after ending the recording. You've been Mia on social. It's taking a break. During February. That's prime engagement season. Riley's perfectly contoured eyebrows rose in concern. Are you feeling okay? You seem different. The word echoed in her mind as she moved through the event, fulfilling her contractual obligations with mechanical precision. She posted the required content, used the designated hashtags, smiled for photos with the other influencers. Every interaction felt hollow, like she was watching herself perform from a distance. During a break in the programming, she found herself in the hotel bathroom, staring at her reflection in the harsh fluorescent light. The woman looking back at her was polished, professional, perfectly on brand, but she felt like a stranger. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jamal. Hope your event is going well. The cabin feels empty without you. The simple message hit her like a physical blow. In a world of performed emotions and calculated connections, his honest sentiment felt like finding water in a desert. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on missing the quiet already. The rest of the event passed in a blur of forced smiles and manufactured enthusiasm. She hit her engagement targets, fulfilled her contractual obligations, and maintained her professional reputation. But as she drove back to the mountain cabin, she felt like she was shedding a skin that had grown too tight. Jamal was waiting for her, sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee and a paperback novel. The sight of him, so real and unpretentious after a day of performed authenticity, made her chest tighten with emotion. How was the city? He asked, setting down his book. Exhausting. She sat beside him, suddenly aware of how overdressed she was in her event outfit. I felt like I was wearing a costume. Maybe because you were. I owe you an apology. For what? For being embarrassed about Mrs. Henderson's comments. For letting other people's opinions matter more than what I know to be true about you. What do you know to be true about me? That you're kind, that you're real, that you see me in a way that makes me want to be better. And what do you know to be true about yourself? The question caught her off guard. I don't know anymore. I used to think I knew exactly who I was, but that was just another performance. So who are you when you're not performing? Someone who paints with coffee and sits by fires and has real conversations about things that matter. She looked at him, this man who'd become her anchor in a world of shifting currents. Someone who wants to be worth knowing. You already are worth knowing, even if I'm scared, even if I don't know how to navigate this without messing it up, especially then. She reached for his hand, noting how her manicured fingers looked against his calloused palms. 2 different worlds, 2 different ways of moving through life, but somehow they fit together. I don't want to go back to performing, she said. I want to try being real. What would that look like? I don't know yet, but I want to find out. With me? If you'll have me, I'll have you exactly as you are. The promise felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, but had always been searching for. She leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his scent, and the possibility of becoming someone more authentic than the person she'd been performing for the first time in years. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The second storm arrived without warning, as if the mountain itself was testing their resolve. Vanessa was in the middle of recording what she'd planned as her farewell video, a carefully scripted explanation of her need to step back from social media, when the power flickered and died. Perfect timing, she muttered, looking at her phone's dead screen. Maybe it's a sign, Jamal said from the kitchen, where he'd been making dinner. The universe telling you to stop overthinking. I'm not overthinking. I'm being responsible. My followers deserve an explanation. Do they? Or do you just feel guilty about choosing yourself for once? The question hit like a physical blow, because it was true. She'd been crafting explanations and justifications for days, trying to find a way to step back from her influencer life without disappointing anyone. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She wanted to disappear from the public eye and discover who she was in private. I built something, she said, gesturing at her silent equipment. 2 million followers, brand partnerships, a career. I can't just abandon it, can't you? People depend on me, my content, my recommendations. Do they depend on you, or do they depend on the fantasy you've been selling? The brutal honesty in his question made her sink into the couch. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavy flakes that caught the last light of day. The storm was going to be bad. She could feel it in the way the wind picked up and the temperature dropped. I don't know the difference anymore, she admitted. Then maybe that's what you need to figure out. Jamal moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, preparing for another night without power. But this time, Vanessa didn't feel the panic she'd experienced during the first storm. Instead, she felt a strange sense of relief. Another chance to exist without documentation, without the pressure to perform her life for strangers. What if I just stopped? She said suddenly. What if I deleted everything and started over? What if you did? I'd lose everything. My income, my identity, my purpose. Would you? Or would you just lose the things that weren't really yours to begin with? She thought about her followers, her brand partnerships, her carefully curated online presence. How much of it reflected who she actually was versus who she thought she should be? How much of her success was built on selling a version of herself that didn't exist? I'm scared, she said. Of what? Of being nobody. Of not mattering. You matter to me. The simple statement hit her like a gift. When had anyone last valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide or promote? When had her worth been measured by her presence rather than her productivity? Why? She asked. Because you're real. Beneath all the performance, you're someone worth knowing. How can you be sure? Because I've seen you. The you that paints with coffee and sits by fires and asks real questions about things that matter. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the storm intensified, wrapping them in isolation that felt less like imprisonment and more like sanctuary. What if I can't figure out how to be real? She asked. Then, you'll keep practicing until you do. What if I'm boring without all the content and curation? What if you're interesting in ways you've never allowed yourself to explore? She looked at him, this man who'd entered her life like a question she hadn't known she needed to ask. His confidence in her ability to become someone more authentic than the person she'd been performing gave her strength she hadn't known she possessed. I want to try, she said. Try what? Being real. Completely real. No more content. No more performance. No more trying to be someone else's idea of perfect. What would that look like? I don't know. Maybe teaching art classes at the community center. Maybe writing a book about creativity instead of performing it. Maybe just learning how to exist without an audience. Maybe all of that. Maybe none of it. Maybe that's okay too. The possibility hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross. She could cling to the safety of her established identity, or she could risk everything for the chance to become someone more authentic. Will you help me? She asked. Help you what? Figure out who I am when I'm not performing. Be patient while I learn how to be real. I'll be here as long as you want me to be, even if I'm messy and uncertain and completely lost. Especially then. She moved closer to him on the couch, drawn by his steadiness in a world that suddenly felt too fluid. I think I love you, she said, the words coming out smaller than she intended. I know I love you. How can you be sure? Because loving you feels like the realest thing I've ever done. She kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. It was nothing like the performed intimacy she'd become accustomed to. Nothing calculated or documented. Just two people finding each other in the quiet space between who they'd been and who they were becoming. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, breathing in his scent and the promise of something new. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, but I want to try anyway. Then we'll try together." The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, wrapped in firelight and possibility, Vanessa felt more at peace than she had in years. Dawn broke clear and sharp, the second storm having passed as quickly as it arrived. Vanessa woke to find herself curled against Jamal's chest, their bodies fitting together with a naturalness that surprised her. For the first time in months, she hadn't reached for her phone upon waking. Instead, she lay still, listening to his steady heartbeat and the profound quiet of a world wrapped in fresh snow. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. She traced patterns on his chest, marveling at how different this intimacy felt from anything she'd experienced before. "I made a decision." "What kind of decision?" "Going to delete everything. My accounts, my brand partnerships, all of it." She felt his body tense beneath her fingers. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm going to do it anyway." "What will you do instead?" "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing for a while. Maybe I'll just exist without documenting it." "That's a big maybe. The biggest maybe of my life." She sat up, looking at him in the morning light streaming through the windows. His face was serious, thoughtful, and she could see him working through the implications of her decision. "What if you regret it?" he asked. "What if I regret not doing it? What if you hate being nobody? What if I love being somebody real?" They stared at each other across the space of possibility, two people standing at the edge of something that could change everything or destroy the careful balance they'd found. "I can't ask you to give up your career for me," he said finally. "You're not asking, I'm choosing. Because of me. Because of me. Because of who I want to be." She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "You showed me what authentic looks like. Now I want to find out what it feels like, even if it means starting over completely." Especially then. She picked up her phone, its screen black and innocent looking. Inside this device was her entire professional life, her financial security, her carefully constructed identity. With a few taps, she could erase years of work and return to being nobody special. "Last chance to talk me out of it," she said. "Wouldn't dream of it." She opened her Instagram app, her fingers hovering over the settings menu. 2.3 million followers, hundreds of brand partnerships, a career that paid her more than she'd ever imagined possible. All of it built on performing a version of herself that felt increasingly foreign. "If you're having second thoughts," Jamal said gently, "you could just take a break. Step back without burning everything down. I've been taking breaks my whole life, from authenticity, from real connection, from being myself. I don't want to take a break anymore." She navigated to the delete account option, her heart pounding as she read the warning messages. "This action cannot be undone. You will lose all photos, videos, and messages. Your username will become available for others to use. Goodbye, Vanessa Monroe," she whispered, and pressed delete. The app disappeared from her phone, taking with it years of carefully curated content, millions of interactions, and a version of herself that no longer felt real. In its place was simply a blank screen and the profound silence of a life no longer performed. "How do you feel?" Jamal asked. "Terrified," she said. "And free? Free to do what?" "Free to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else." She deleted her other social media accounts with growing confidence, each action feeling like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. Her YouTube channel with its 100,000 subscribers, her TikTok account with its viral videos, her LinkedIn profile with its professional networking. "Now what?" she asked when it was done. "Now you get to discover what comes next." What if nothing comes next? What if I just fade into obscurity? Then you'll fade as yourself instead of disappearing as someone else. The distinction hit her like a revelation. She'd been disappearing for years, hiding behind filters and performance until she'd forgotten who she was underneath. Now she had the chance to appear as herself, even if that meant starting from nothing. "I want to paint," she said suddenly. "Real painting with real supplies. Not for content, not for anyone else, just for me." Then paint. "I want to teach art classes at the community center, help kids discover their creativity without worrying about likes or shares." Then teach. I want to write a book about finding authenticity in a world that rewards performance. Then write, I want to love you without documenting it or sharing it or making it into content. Then love me. The simplicity of his responses, the way he made possibilities sound like inevitability, gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. She'd spent years making her life complicated, layering performance upon performance until she'd lost sight of what was real. Now she had the chance to make it simple again. What if we fail? She asked. What if we succeed? What if I'm not interesting enough to love without all the social media stuff? What if you're more interesting than you've ever allowed yourself to be? She looked at him, this man who'd walked into her life like an answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. His faith in her ability to become someone more authentic than the person she'd been performing gave her strength she hadn't known she needed. I love you, she said. I love you too, even if I'm nobody special. Especially because you're somebody real. The morning light filled the cabin with golden warmth, and for the first time in years, Vanessa felt like she was exactly where she belonged, not performing for an audience, not curating a moment for content, just existing as herself in the company of someone who loved her for who she was rather than who she pretended to be. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in her adult life, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. 3 weeks later, Vanessa stood in the community center's art room, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of 15 6-year-olds armed with watercolors and boundless enthusiasm. Paint covered every surface, including most of the children, and the air buzzed with a kind of creative energy she'd forgotten existed. Miss Vanessa, look what I made. Emma, a gap-toothed girl with pigtails, held up a painting that was more enthusiasm than technique. It's my dog, but he's purple, because purple is my favorite color. It's beautiful, Vanessa said, and meant it. Tell me about your dog, as Emma launched into a detailed explanation of her purple dog's adventures. Vanessa felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Genuine connection without performance. Creativity without documentation. Joy without the need to share it with strangers. You're different, said Marcus, the community center director, appearing at her elbow with a cup of coffee. From what I expected, I mean. How so? When you first applied, I looked you up online, saw your old content, your following. I expected someone more, polished, more concerned with image. I was those things, she admitted, watching as two boys collaborated on a mural that depicted what appeared to be dinosaurs having a tea party. I'm trying to be different now. Suit you? The simple validation felt better than any brand partnership or viral post ever had. She was learning that real satisfaction came from contribution rather than consumption, from creating value rather than capturing attention. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jamal. How's the first day going? She typed back, messy and perfect. Just like real life. Can't wait to hear about it. Dinner at 7. Wouldn't miss it. The easy rhythm of their relationship still surprised her. No games, no performance, no careful curation of their interactions. Just two people choosing each other every day, building something real in the quiet spaces between their separate lives. Miss Vanessa, a small voice interrupted her thoughts. Are you going to paint something too? She looked down at David, a shy boy who'd been watching her all morning. His painting was careful, precise, lacking the joyful abandon of his classmates, but showing genuine artistic instinct. Would you like me to? Yes, but not for the wall. Just for you. Just for you. The phrase hit her like a gift. When had she last created something purely for herself, without considering its potential audience or market value? She sat at one of the small tables, accepting a brush and paper from David. The other children gathered around, curious about what their teacher would make. The attention should have made her nervous, but instead, she felt the same freedom she'd experienced painting with coffee in the storm-darkened cabin. She painted without thinking, letting her hand move across the paper, guided by instinct rather than intention. Colors blended and flowed, creating something that looked like mountain sunrise, or maybe the inside of a flower, or perhaps the feeling of being seen for who you really are. What is it? Asked Emma. It's whatever you see in it, Vanessa replied, and realized she meant it. Art didn't have to be explicable or marketable or shareable. It could simply be an expression of what it felt like to be alive in a particular moment. The children scattered to their own projects, satisfied with her answer in the way only children could be. Adults would have demanded more explanation, more context, more justification. But kids understood that sometimes the best things couldn't be explained, only experienced. When the class ended and the children had been collected by their parents, Vanessa stayed behind to clean up. The routine tasks felt meditative after weeks of constant performance. Washing brushes, wiping tables, organizing supplies. Simple, useful work that served a purpose beyond her own advancement. "You're going to be good at this," Marcus said, helping her stack the tiny chairs. "At what?" "At being a teacher. At being yourself. I'm still figuring out who that is. Aren't we all?" She drove home through the mountain roads, noting how the landscape had changed since she'd first arrived. The snow was melting, revealing patches of brown earth and the earliest hints of green. Spring was coming, and with it, the possibility of growth she'd never imagined. Jamal was waiting on the porch when she arrived, and the sight of him still made her heart race. Not with the performed passion she'd become accustomed to, but with a deeper satisfaction of genuine connection. "How was your first day as a teacher?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Perfect," she said, and meant it. "Absolutely perfect. Tell me everything." And she did, sharing every detail of her day, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because he listened with the same attention he gave to electrical problems, with the same care he showed for everything that mattered. This was her new life, small, real, and completely her own. 6 months later, Vanessa woke to the sound of children's laughter drifting through the cabin windows. She'd turned the lower level into a proper art studio, and Saturday mornings had become open studio time for any kid who wanted to come create without rules or expectations. "Your students are here," Jamal said, appearing in the doorway with coffee and a smile that still made her stomach flutter. "Our students," she corrected, accepting the mug gratefully. "You're the one who taught them how to make paint from berries. Practical skills. Everything with you is practical." "Not everything." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so casual and intimate it would have been impossible to capture in any social media post. Their relationship existed in these small moments, accumulated over months of choosing each other without fanfare or documentation. "Got a call yesterday," she said, watching him straighten their rumpled sheets. "From a publisher. They want to discuss the book, The Authenticity Book, living offline, finding yourself in a digital world." She still couldn't believe she'd written it, that the words had poured out of her like water from a broken dam. "They think it could help people." "Will help people." "How can you be sure?" "Because it helped you." She looked at him. This man who'd entered her life like a practical solution to a simple problem, but had become something much more complex and necessary. His faith in her ability to contribute something meaningful to the world gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. "What if the book becomes popular? What if people want me to go back to being an influencer?" "Then you'll decide who you want to be. And if I choose to stay exactly as I am, then you'll have chosen well." The children's voices grew louder downstairs, and she could hear the familiar sounds of creative chaos beginning. Paint tubes being squeezed, brushes being dipped, young artists discovering what happened when blue met yellow, or when you painted outside the lines. "I should go help them," she said. "In a minute." He pulled her back to bed, and she went willingly, marveling at how different this intimacy felt from anything she'd experienced before. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just two people loving each other in the quiet space between who they'd been and who they were becoming. "I love you," she said, the words coming as naturally as breathing. "I love you too. Even if I never become anyone famous again." Especially then. She dressed quickly, choosing paint-stained jeans and a shirt that had seen better days. The woman who'd once spent hours perfecting her appearance for public consumption now barely glanced in the mirror. Beauty, she'd learned, was something you felt rather than something you performed. Downstairs, chaos reigned in the best possible way. Children covered in paint, paper scattered across every surface. It's the kind of joyful mess that spoke of genuine creativity rather than curated content. This was her life now, small, real, and completely her own. Miss Vanessa, Emma called from across the room. Look what I made. She looked and saw and celebrated the pure joy of creation without documentation. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the cabin, surrounded by children and creativity and the man who'd helped her remember who she was, Vanessa felt warmer than she ever had in her carefully constructed former life. This was what happiness looked like when it wasn't performed for an audience. This was what love felt like when it wasn't commodified for content. This was what it meant to be real.